the Art of Decluttering podcast. I'm your host, Amy Revell. I am having a lovely Friday evening, which is when I am recording this. It's been a huge week. We've had new staff starting at the Art of Decluttering, lots of planning and coaching and lots of exciting things happening. And I have just really enjoyed having a bit of space on this Friday night. The kids are at youth group. Cal and I have had some catch-up time. He's just gone to pick up the kids. And I was like, I'm going to record an episode. And I actually thought, as I'm like planning what do I want to talk about, I wanted to talk about this breathing space in relation to decluttering and organizing and like intentional living. And then I thought, do you know what I've literally done? I have literally just taken a few hours to have breathing space of my own. And I feel refreshed. I feel like I've got a bit more clarity in my thinking and enthusiasm in my bones. And so I come to you with an episode called Breathing Space, because I hear a lot of analogies when I'm working with clients or doing client intake calls. And a lot of the analogies we use are around breath. So when a client is describing to me like their calendar is super busy and they've got no breathing space, or when I'm working with a client, they say, this room is so cluttered that I can't even breathe in here. Or they're describing to me, or I'm catching up with a friend, they're like, I've been running around from pillar to post, it's one thing to the other, I can't catch my breath. Or if someone's been sick and it just feels like there's one thing after another, it's I can't catch my breath. And so I feel like it's really interesting that we use this concept of our breath and not being able to breathe properly or not being able to catch our breath when we feel overwhelmed. And often it's because we feel overwhelmed by clutter, whether it's calendar clutter, clutter in our spaces, clutter just in our activities and what we're doing and our scheduling. It feels like we can't breathe. And then like sometimes when I'm working with clients, I hear the opposite. So we'll end a session and then they'll go, oh my gosh, I feel like I can breathe again. Or they walk into a space and they take this really lovely breath, and you can kind of almost see that just the weight lift off their shoulders. And so I've been thinking about this concept around breathing and what it means to have breathing space in our homes and in our calendars and in our lives. And I think breathing space is tied into minimalism. I mean, every person's expression of minimalism is quite different. I was catching up with a friend this week and they said, oh, I'm not really a minimalist because we have more than like 4 forks and 4 glasses. And I was like, no, you guys are minimalists because you're really intentional. You're essentialist. You keep what is essential without putting yourselves, out all the time where it's like, oh, I have 5 friends over now. I don't have a glass to give them a glass of water. And so I think this breathing space and minimalism have a lot in common, because I think when we overfill things, we overstrive, we overcommit, we feel this tension in our chests. We feel like I don't have the freedom to breathe. And isn't it funny how when we go on holidays or we take a break, we often go to spaces that have clear, open skies. We go to the beach, we go bushwalking, we go to a lovely scenery, we go to the country. It's like this concept of like needing fresh breath in our lungs is so important. And it's a real shame, I think, that so many people in their homes and in their spaces and in their normal everyday lives feel like they just don't have breathing space. And sometimes it's because we've overcommitted out of necessity. So maybe it's that you've picked up an extra shift at work because the cost of living is out of control and you actually need to do that for the sake of your family. And so you're reducing your breathing space, but quite intentionally and for a purpose and out of essentialism. But sometimes we do it just because we're not really concentrating on being intentional in our lives. Like I think there's so many homes. In fact, I was working with a client it was last week, I think. And it really struck me that they have a large home and lots of things, and they spend so much time managing their things. Like they spend so much time organizing them, tidying up, rearranging it, getting things serviced, buying new things, upgrading things, returning things, ordering things. And it takes, I feel even out of breath saying all of the things because it takes them so much time that they're actually robbing themselves of this like breathing space. You've got this beautiful home, you've got this lovely family, you've got kids, you've got all of the things that you've ever wanted, and yet you're actually crowding out all of those things, the breathing space of just being with your family, because you're filling it with stuff. You're filling it with this constant need to shop online, this constant need to go to the shops, this constant need to have more stuff, have better stuff, improve, and it's exhausting. So what I want to do, it's going to go to a quick break, but I want to talk about what it looks like when you're crowding out breathing space, but more importantly, what does it look like when you've got breathing space? And I want to talk about that in relation to the podcast as well. So let's be back in just a second. So it's important to realize that you get to choose how you fill your time and what this breathing space looks like for you. Having breathing space in your calendar means that if there's a night free or if there's a whole weekend free, you don't then scramble to fill it and book things in and think, oh my gosh, we've got to make the most of every possible moment. I know a family who feel every single moment of every single day, and it's exhausting. They seem to manage okay. So maybe that's breathing space for them. I'm tired just looking at it. And so breathing space, you need to nut out what that looks like for you. For me, it means like sometimes when I've got an evening free, I'll go to bed early and I'll listen to a podcast or read a book. Like I just love that thought of like, gosh, it's 8:30. I am going to go climb into bed and it's warm and it's snuggly and everyone in my family is safe. And I just feel like there's this breathing space to do things. And you might find that if you're creating this breathing space, you can play board games or pick up an instrument. You might like to cook really nice midweek meals that you otherwise wouldn't because you're in a rush. You might like to host people for a games night or for drinks or for whatever. Go for a walk. You might play sport. You might visit with friends. You might relax in the sun or sit in front of the fire. But the most important thing is you do all of that without feeling guilty. Because if you're feeling guilty while you're doing all those fun things, you're not fully embracing the breathing space. I feel like the breathing space comes with a sense of intentionality. And so when you're sitting in it, you're not thinking there's 100 other things I should be doing. You're actually enjoying just being in it. And I love the thought. I think it means sometimes like what it looks like in your home, for instance. So we've talked about what it looks like in your calendar and your schedule. But I think this breathing space in your home means that when the dishwasher finishes and you're putting away the clean dishes, you're not struggling to fit everything back into the cupboards because there's space. Or when you bring the washing on off the line, you've got all the clean washing, it's easy enough to put it away in your wardrobe without struggling to fit everything in because you've just got this space and it's like there's just air. It is so good for your clothes, just as a sidebar, it's so good for your clothes to have air in between them because then you're not getting moths and you're not getting dust and things just have air and they breathe and it's so much better. I think sometimes what I've noticed in our family is this breathing space means coming home from the supermarket with our groceries and not struggling to find the space to put all the food away that I've just purchased because my kitchen or my pantry is already so overstocked. We see it with clients all the time is there's food all over the bench or sometimes even in bags on the floor because the pantry or the fridge or the freezer are already so overstocked that there's not even the space to put things in. And so all of a sudden the kitchen, you walk in there and you feel like you can't breathe because there's stuff everywhere. But if you open a pantry and you can see what you have and you get inspired to cook something or you're like, oh, I feel inspired to make a healthy choice because I've got all this stuff here. That actually is what breathing space looks like as well. So it can look like what your home actually like feels like. And it also can look like what you feel like with all of the things that you're committed to. And so my challenge this week is to have a think about where in your calendar or schedule or in your home, maybe you might like to simplify things so that you can have more breathing space. So it might be that you need to declutter some stuff. It might be that you physically need to declutter in your home. Hello, you're in the right spot. There's 100 million podcasts. No, there's not 100 million. There's 400 odd podcasts that you can go back and listen to for advice on that. Or it might be that you need to declutter some things out of your calendar, some things you've committed to that actually doesn't suit you anymore, doesn't fit with the time commitment that you have. We've got to acknowledge seasons. And sometimes you're in a season of that tight restriction. And sometimes you just need to be in a season of like, oh, I can breathe again. So have a think about that. If you're identifying a space in your home that you're like, yep, that's actually what I need to declutter so that I can have a bit of breathing space, just go back through the podcast history, find that episode around that topic. If you can't find it, just jump in our Facebook group. It's the Art of Decluttering community on Facebook, and just ask the community, like, is there an episode on magazines, kids' outside toys, socks and undies? Ask, because we'll be able to direct you in the right way. So in terms of the podcast, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts this morning, and the hosts were talking about how they feel really stressed when they fall behind listening to one of their favorite podcasts. So they fall behind because, you just miss it for 1 week, or you miss it for 2 or 3 weeks, and there's lots going on. And they said that sometimes what they find is that they stop listening to their favorite podcast because they've fallen too far behind and it's overwhelming to catch up. And I was like mortified. I was like, oh my gosh, have I overwhelmed my community with like a weekly podcast? And you guys are like, hey, Amy, take a chill pill. We need some breathing space. So they were saying it's the reason they take a break over summer. Not only does it give them some breathing space, but also they were like, it allows our listeners time to catch up on missed episodes. And so it got me thinking, I just thought I'd ask you guys, like, as my community, do you want opportunity to have breathing space to catch up on missed episodes? Do you love that it's a weekly podcast? Or actually, do you find that like we've come so far and you're like, do you know what, Amy? Like, I would be cool if you took a month off, or maybe you can do 3 episodes in a month, or do fortnightly, or whatever. I would love to hear your suggestions. The podcast isn't going anywhere. I'm not tiring of the podcast, but I did think, what does breathing space look like for a weekly podcast that has been weekly for its entire life of like, what are we now? I think 8 years or 7 years of podcasting. So I would love to know what you think. Maybe you find that the podcast being this shorter length is actually perfect. You can keep up to date with it. And the irony is I'm asking this in this week's podcast, and perhaps there's people that are so far behind they're not hearing this until like 6 months later. I get the irony of that. But send me a message on send me a DM on Instagram, or send me an email at hello@theartofdecluttering.com.au. I would just love to know what you think. I mean, I have so many topics that I want to talk to you guys about. I've got a big long list. So it's not about kind of going, oh, Amy doesn't know what to talk about. It is legitimately about being intentional in the way that this podcast runs so that we're true to our values. And breathing space is one of those. So as I said, not going anywhere. In fact, the business is just going from strength to strength. I've got 3 new team members starting this month, which I'm so stoked about. They are amazing. They're all in Melbourne. So if you are in Melbourne, make sure you reach out if you're wanting some decluttering sessions. But please send me a DM, send me an email. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's any topics you want me to cover in the future. And I would particularly love to hear, do you guys need some breathing space? Do you think like, okay, Amy, like maybe take the month of October or November or December off, or, like I'm so open to your ideas and suggestions, and I'm also open to you going, everything's perfect as it is, but let me know, because without your feedback, I don't know what you guys are loving. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope you can create some breathing space in your schedule and in your home. It is really important. Sometimes it can feel almost like you're on a holiday in your own home when you can breathe again, when you don't feel that overwhelmed feeling every time you enter every room in your home. It has been lovely. I love that I can record this podcast after a couple of hours of breathing space myself. And so until next week, enjoy the freedom. I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land this podcast is recorded on. I would also like to pay respect to their elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would love you to rate and review the show on your podcast app. That will help others to find the Art of Decluttering podcast as well. If you'd like any more information, you can visit theartofdecluttering.com.au, and I would love to see you in my Facebook group. Just search the Art of Decluttering community on Facebook and join today. I hope that you have an incredible rest of your day and enjoy the freedom.